My family established this ranch long before Claudette Marsh's ancestors ever set foot in Texas. For more than 150 years, generations of Callaway survived droughts, floods, hard winters, and endless backbreaking labor to keep this land alive. Then one day, a woman named Claudette Marsh decided she had the authority to put up for sale, not purchase it, not negotiate for it, actually list it. She submitted paperwork on property she never owned, never worked, and had absolutely no right to control. Even worse, the HOA backed her every step of the way. What Claudette didn't realize was that I wasn't about to sit back and watch it happen. I already had a strategy in motion, and eventually it would begin right at her own front door. She never saw it coming. And trust me, this story only gets more unbelievable from here. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from. Leave your country in the comments below. My name is Reuben Callaway, and I'm the 5th generation of my family to live on Callaway Ranch. This isn't some weekend hobby farm or a scenic piece of land people visit for photographs. It's a fully operational cattle ranch deep in the Texas Hill Country, first settled in 1874 by my great-great-great-grandfather, Elias Callaway. He broke the first ground himself using a mule named Sunday and a worn-out hand plow. Every section of that ranch carries a story. Every fence line, water trough, and pasture has history attached to it. The land holds memories, sacrifices, and scars left behind by the generations who came before me. That's important to understand because what happened next wasn't simply a disagreement over property. It became a war. About 4 years earlier, our ranch had been absorbed into the jurisdiction of Ridgemont Estates HOA. The county approved the change with little public attention, and at first it seemed harmless enough. Our property sat on the edge of the development, and the HOA mostly left us alone. We'd receive occasional newsletters and minor reminders about neighborhood standards. Nothing worth arguing over. Then Claudette Marsh moved into the neighborhood. Not long after arriving, she secured a position on the HOA Architectural Review Board. That's when everything started changing. At first, the complaints seemed petty. We received a violation notice regarding an old weather vane, then another because our horse trailer could supposedly be seen from the roadway. Then came a formal complaint about the sound of roosters. Roosters on a working cattle ranch. I called the HOA office and spoke with an exhausted employee who sounded like she repeated the same explanation dozens of times. Her exact words were, "Mrs. Marsh believes your property doesn't align with the visual standards of Ridgemont Estates." That should have been my warning sign. Unfortunately, I didn't move quickly enough. One Tuesday morning in March, I was repairing fencing along the south pasture when my neighbor, Dex Pruitt, called. Something sounded off in his voice. Quiet, uneasy. "Reuben," he said, "you need to check Zillow right now." I opened the app. The Callaway Ranch, all 340 acres of it, was listed for sale. The asking price was $2.1 million. The listing included aerial drone footage, professional photographs, and a detailed description describing it as a prime investment opportunity within the expanding Ridgemont development corridor. I hadn't listed my ranch. I hadn't authorized anyone to list it. I hadn't spoken to a realtor. For several seconds, I just stood there in the pasture, holding my phone, while cattle moved behind me. A cold feeling climbed up my spine that had nothing to do with the breeze blowing across the field. Within an hour, I contacted my attorney, Priscilla Vance. Her advice was simple. Document everything. Gather evidence. Don't confront anyone yet. I managed to follow that advice for approximately 45 minutes. Then I got in my truck and drove directly to Claudette Marsh's house. She opened the door wearing a crisp white blouse and holding a glass of iced tea as if she'd been expecting me. "Reuben," she said with a smile that felt far too welcoming, "you listed my ranch." She tilted her head. The HOA has authority to review non-compliant properties under Covenant Section 14. That isn't a real estate listing, Claudette. Her smile widened. It becomes one when the board approves remediation through market correction. I didn't understand half the nonsense she was saying, but I understood exactly what that smile meant. I drove home immediately and called Priscilla again. I told her to investigate every document, every vote, and every decision Claudette had touched. 2 days later, Priscilla called back with information that hit me harder than a kick from an angry mule. Claudette Marsh wasn't just serving on the Architectural Review Board. While nobody was paying attention, she'd also maneuvered herself into the positions of acting treasurer and interim HOA president after the previous president moved away in January. Using those combined powers, she'd pushed through an emergency amendment to the HOA covenants. The amendment stated that any non-conforming legacy property receiving 3 violation notices within a 12-month period could be placed on the open market by HOA action. Our weather vane, our horse trailer, our roosters. Here's the rewritten continuation in the same style and similar length. Every one of those violations had been carefully arranged. Claudette created the complaints. She drafted the amendment herself. She cast a vote that pushed it through. And then she used it to place my family's ranch on the market as if it were some neglected investment property waiting to be flipped for profit. Land that had been in my family's hands for more than a century before hers ever arrived in Texas. I sat with that information for a while. Then something changed. I stopped being angry. I became calm. Very calm. Because there was one thing Claudette Marsh didn't know about me. Before returning home to manage the ranch, I spent 11 years working as a title examiner for a real estate law firm in Austin. Property records are my language. I understand easements. I understand access rights. I understand exactly how ownership chains are built and how they can unravel. So I started digging. I pulled records on every parcel within a half-mile radius of Claudette's home. The process took 6 straight days. County archives, survey maps, deed transfers, old property abstracts stretching back to 1961. And on day 6, I found what I was looking for. Claudette's house sat at the end of a private cul-de-sac. Her driveway connected the main road through a narrow strip of land approximately 30 feet wide. That access corridor existed because of the shared easement granted in 1987. But there was a problem. The easement wasn't attached to Claudette's lot. It belonged to the neighboring parcel. Parcel 118C, an empty lot sitting untouched for years. The owners were a retired couple living in Scottsdale, Arizona. They hadn't visited the property in nearly a decade and seemed to keep it only because they continued paying a tax bill every year. I called them on a Wednesday. By Friday afternoon, we had an agreement. I purchased parcel 118C for $47,000 in cash. Just like that, I became the owner of the land through which Claudette's driveway easement passed. Under Texas property law, that gave me the right to review the easement and, with proper notice and procedure, potentially modify or terminate it. Priscilla prepared the paperwork immediately. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. The notice went out Monday morning. I know exactly when Claudette received it. 40 minutes later, my phone rang, and for the first time, I heard the real Claudette Marsh. The friendly hostess voice was gone. "You can't do this," she snapped. "Actually, I can," I replied. "It's right there in the deed records. Section 4 of the 1987 easement agreement." The line went quiet. The owner of the servant estate may terminate access with 60 days written notice. More silence. Then I delivered the part that mattered. After July 9th, your driveway access will no longer exist. Another pause. But I'm a reasonable man, Claudette. That got her attention. I'd be willing to discuss a long-term access agreement. She knew exactly what was coming. Maybe we begin with the HOA removing my ranch from the market. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. I attended. Claudette looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. The other board members looked even worse. From their expressions, it was obvious they had only recently learned what she'd been doing behind the scenes. They sat silently with crossed arms while the meeting began. When the motion was introduced to remove the Callaway Ranch listing, the vote wasn't even close. 5 in favor, 0 opposed. The listing disappeared. 11 days later, Claudette Marsh officially resigned from every HOA position she held. The public explanation stated that she wished to focus on personal projects. Nobody in that room believed it for a second. The violations against the ranch were erased. The amendment lost support, and the threat against my family's land was over. As for the easement, I did something Claudette never expected. I recorded a permanent access easement benefiting her property. Unlimited access. No fees. No conditions. Valid forever. Because I'm not Claudette Marsh. I don't use power simply because I have it. I don't punish people for entertainment. That said, I kept parcel 118C. It's valuable land. In fact, I've been considering expanding the south pasture onto part of it. The Callaway Ranch is still here, 152 years old, and still standing strong. My great-great-great-grandfather first broke that ground with a hand plow and a mule named Sunday. Claudette Marsh came after it with legal amendments, HOA authority, and a Zillow listing. What she forgot, and what many people forget when they look at ranchers, is something simple. We're patient, extremely patient. And one thing we almost never do is sell. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to HOA Revenge Stories, because next week's story makes this one seem as minor as a neighborhood noise complaint.